Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Confident Hypnotherapist Podcast. I hope you're doing well wherever you are in the world. This week, we have one of Orlando, Florida's finest joining us, Mr. Michael Watson, international trainer in NLP, Ericksonian hypnotherapy and consultant, trainer, instructor, and also runs an incredible Facebook group called Virtual Chapter, which I highly, 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 highly recommend to you. If there's anything that you take from this podcast today, which I'm sure there'll be many things, please go and join this group because it's incredible. Michael Watson, thank you so much for joining me today.
Lawrence, it's great to be here with you. I'm looking forward to visiting with you.
Now, one of the places I always tend to start these conversations, because I personally find it fascinating, and given that you're a gentleman that's been in this industry for a few decades now, what is it that brought you to hypnosis in the first instance?
Yes, I have been in this industry for donkey's years, as my English friend. Literally, like over 40 years now, and it's kind of. I think it's relevant. What I want to say, it's a significant thing for me to tell you how I got here, because I think it flavors everything that I do with regard to hypnosis. And what we were all looking for, everybody in hypnosis, has some story, right, about how they happened to find their way here. I really didn't know much about hypnosis. It wasn't actually on my radar, other than something that I'd seen some crazy things on TV, and I remember like Pinky and the Brain, or various other academic journals, where somebody had done some strange thing with hypnosis, usually some kind of a mind control gag that they incorporated into a soap opera or a television program, and I didn't take it too seriously, and yet I think I was involved in probably the biggest trance game on the planet. Because I started out as a 6-year-old choir kid, the ones with the starched collars and the bows. I was a boy soprano. I remember as a child sitting in church underneath the big like 32-foot pipes, rattling the walls of the cathedral, behind me, while they were saying all this kind of mysterious religious stuff. I do remember, and I think it's a function of my years that it's a little different now. But I remember back in those days, the Mass was such a solemn thing that you weren't supposed to like look up at anything. Most of the time to keep your eyes averted and stuff. And I remember there was this great prayer that anybody who's been to church still probably hears, because it echoes again and again. And somewhere in the prayer, the phrase is, "Therefore, with angels and archangels and all the company of heaven, we laud and magnify your glorious name, evermore praising thee and saying," and then we sung this big song, the Sanctus, this beautiful hymn. And what I remember as a 6-year-old, thinking that while all of this tremendous stuff was happening around me, that the vault of the cathedral was surely filled with angelic presences and heavenly hosts. And, it was the only metaphor that I had to relate to things that were outside our usual everyday experience. And in fact, it so inspired me that it seems like another life story when I'm telling it. So inspired me that I studied for the priesthood. I was ordained to the priesthood in the Episcopal Church, the Church of England in America. And right about this time, the church went on a gay witch hunt. The very year that I was ordained, there was a resolution passed at the annual convention of the church against the ordination of gay people. And they began bringing people in. It's kind of like something you would see on public broadcasting system in a biography of a story about Henry VIII or something. Going to put
Spanish Inquisition or something like that.
Yeah,
no one ever expects the Spanish Inquisition. So
well, that's exactly what it was like. And so so I had been ordained already. By the way, you can't sort of unordain people, but I still had the standing committee, which are the folks that put people in parishes and give them jobs to get by, and they were the troublemakers. They were the ones that had problems with this. And the bishop, fortunately, was a good friend of mine and also a gay man. So I found myself in a peculiar position. I didn't want to face the Inquisition. And what I did was I went away to a monastery for 2.5 years, a Benedictine monastery. And, and I've got to tell you, it was one of the coolest retreats that I've ever had in my life. But also something very clear to me that this wasn't the place that I belonged. I had some stuff to do out in the world. And so a couple of years later, I came back out. I called a meeting of the standing committee. I basically, which had never been done before, by the way, it was very interesting. They were completely surprised to hear from me. They also knew who I was because I had been politically involved with the founding of Integrity, which is the gay organization in the church. So they didn't really have any question to ask me in the first place. But when I went in, I gave them a long story about my history and the history of my ancestors with the Church of England all the way back to forever. And I didn't understand who they thought they were and what position they were in that gave them the right to tell me how I should behave or what I could do in my own church. But since they did that, I was going to fire them. I didn't need to do this anymore. Thank you for sharing, but I don't need you, literally. And I remember that when I did that, I shook, not when I said it. I was my best impersonation of Glenda Jackson that I could possibly be, and I railed at them and I told them, but then afterwards I walked out of the room and I panicked. I'm like, oh my God, what have I just done now? I've got this education, and all this stuff so I immediately went to the bishop's office upstairs because he's a friend of mine and I was at the cathedral for this meeting. And I said, Jim, you're not going to believe what I have just done. And he said, well, you're still a priest of this diocese and I'm still your bishop. So if you'd like, we don't need to worry about that being placed in a parish somewhere. There are other choices. He said, I can give you a job in the diocesan counseling center tomorrow. And so I started working in pastoral counseling in the Diocese of Chicago in the mid 70s, when there were a couple interesting things happening in the world. One of them is neurolinguistic programming was being discovered or exposed, or however you want to say it. Yeah. And the other was that Shakti Gawaine's work was showing up, the creative visualization lady. And there were a bunch of nuns and monks and stuff as well that were writing books about using visualization and imagery in spiritual exercises. And so this is the kind of work that I was doing with clients. And one day in the middle of a session, this guy, opened his eyes when it was, all over and said, Michael, this, very seriously, by the way, he says, this is really hypnosis. And I'm like, oh my God, it had never occurred to me, because I thought this is really meditation. This is really profound meditation and stuff. But I had never, I had never called it by that name before. And it intrigued me. And right about this time, my husband had lost a job that he had, and he was looking for new work and wanted to go to Texas, which is where he's from. And resourceful as he was, he found a brochure of a woman that was teaching a hypnosis certification class in Houston. And I was so naive that I thought, oh my God, there's probably only 3 people in the universe that teach hypnosis. So we'll just have to move to Texas. So literally, we moved to Texas in order for me to take a 30-hour hypnosis course. So like 10 Wednesday nights, for a while. And when it was over, I was really good at inductions, but I had already been really good at inductions. My spiritual experience was about altered states. I am a mystic to the bone, and so I was a little disappointed in the sense that I didn't quite know what to do with all of this. And I suspect a lot of people sort of start out that way. You get a class, you think you've got it, and the minute you're out the door, it's like, well, what if this happens? Or what if, what if
questions start? Exactly.
Yeah. So in any case, I was very lucky because right at that time, the lady that was teaching the hypnosis course to us was enrolled in one of the first NLP practitioner trainings. And she was telling us about this thing called neurolinguistic programming that was amazing me, absolutely amazed me. And I found through NLP so many things that I could do in my hypnotic work, and it just really added substance to and some techniques, and stuff like that. I'm not a big technique guy, I've got to tell you, because I think NLP and hypnosis are often really misunderstood in that we go to classes and people teach us a whole bunch of techniques, and then we meet clients and we're trying to figure out which technique am I going to
apply to this client. Yeah.
And in fact, usually it isn't even which technique am I going to use with which client, is which technique am I going to use with what diagnoses. What's the predicament, and what do we have, what do we have in our bag of tricks that will work with that particular predicament. I really think that NLP, for example, and I'm not exactly sure how many NLP folks there are in your audience, or if this is understood, but I think it applies equally to hypnosis. Ultimately, it isn't an understanding of the techniques, it's an understanding of the place that the techniques come from. NLP is founded on a system of a number of presuppositions. And Judith Delosier, who was John Grinder's significant other at the beginning, says that she says, when we first invented neurolinguistic programming at my kitchen table, I love it. She talks about it the way that some people talk about their Amway business. But she says, when we first discovered NLP, what we had were a set of presuppositions. And before that, what we really had was one presupposition from Korzybski, that is, the map is not the territory. And what she said that has continued to echo in my neurology ever since was, she says, and if you take that one presupposition and live with it, and and apply it and look through it, at the world, she says you would invent NLP on your own. And I think it's an interesting thing that for instance, some of the basic presuppositions of NLP are things like choice is better than no choice. There's a positive intention behind every behavior, etc. If you think about just those two right there, if I were to meet a client presenting some unwanted behavior, and I simply have in my mind the understanding that there's some positive intention here, and it would be good for this person to have some choice, then I don't need a technique that has 6 steps or 19 steps. I need to understand where it is that this railroad needs to end up before the session is over. What do we have to accomplish here? And then I think that the best thing to do is to make it up in a way that is appropriate and useful for the client themselves. I one of the things that I do with IACT, by the way, I'm the principal trainer for the Association of Counselors and Therapists. So I've created the hypnosis curriculum, and I teach a stress management certification program and different things. And I had a woman who called me up not too long ago, wanted to be in the stress class, and I actually, her call went to voicemail. So before I spoke to her, I listened to her. And she stressed me out, because she really wanted to be in this class, and she was just very, very concerned that she wanted to know what was she going to be able to do, when the class is over, and she wanted to be able to work with doctors, and she wanted to be able to go into corporations and stuff like that. And she told me in the message that she was eminently qualified because not only was she a certified hypnotherapist, but she also did angel healing and Bach flower remedies and stuff like that. And all I can remember thinking is, if you want to work with doctors, don't tell them that.
Tell them that bit. No. It's a little too over here when they want to be over here. Yeah.
Yeah. So John Grinder said, so here's one of my other, there are a couple of statements. Judy's about NLP and its foundation. And John Grinder said that in order to produce change, what's required are 2 things: congruity and a ritual. And, and I remember thinking, this is absolutely right. That the congruity being, and this is where the Bach flower remedies doesn't work in the doctor's office, that it's a question of presenting what it is that you do in a way that makes it accessible to the client. And so people will, well, yeah, but I really believe in that stuff. And I just keep thinking, what you believe isn't important. What your client believes is important.
Exactly. The map, coming back to that, map is not the territory.
Yeah. So how do we get rapport with them, and how do we develop with them a ritual that takes them from where they are to where it is that they want to be? I'm a big believer in something I call it evolutionary hypnosis, and I just have this idea that somewhere at the center of our being there is something magnificent that wants to happen. In our expansion or unfolding or emergence or whatever metaphor you'd like to use to talk about that with. And that occasionally that naturally occurring process gets interrupted because we've been subjected to some kind of trauma or, some set of circumstances. And that's when we need to find a hypnotist in order to get us back on track. Milton Erickson suggested that he was talking about psychiatric patients, and I know all of our clients aren't psychiatric patients, although a few of them probably should be. But he said about the patients at the hospital that he worked at, he said, our clients are our clients because they have lost rapport with their own unconscious mind. And the task of therapy is to restore that relationship. So I always thought that's great. If I'm gonna work with you, what I'd like to say is, hello, Lawrence. Let me introduce you to Lawrence, and the two of you, can work this out because you guys know more about it than I do anyway. But instead, I'm afraid, and this is so sad for new hypnotists. I think some people just scare themselves to death with this because they've got a diagnosis. They had a phone call from somebody who's going to come and see them that has trichotillomania or something. And they're like, oh, this is cool. Let's go out on the internet and find out if anybody has a script for that. Because they think that they're and they've deluded themselves into believing that there is a script for everything, and you need to collect all of those scripts. And once
it's almost like a spell book of magic words that somehow are going to make that change.
Exactly, and you've got to know the answer to every problem in human existence as well. I've got a client. What am I going to tell him? What? I think
that is one of the biggest doubts, though, isn't it? Is that people think, oh, I'm here to fix the person or cure the person,
right?
And if they don't do that, then I can't be very good at what I do,
right?
That's not necessarily what it's about.
Well, and you said it well earlier. I think just really at the beginning, it's about how do we teach people to sort of stay out of their own way, because the way to do a great job is to not overthink it. And I'll tell you what, we are a community of overthinkers because we will spend hours arguing with one another about whether you should call it the unconscious or the subconscious,
exactly,
as though there's some significance to that. Because, by the way, that isn't its name. These are labels that we made up later on and started applying to human experiences, but we it becomes the reality to us. Our metaphor, the metaphor in which we work gets, and this is what happens to religion, by the way. Quite frankly, so it's one of the reasons I'm not in that racket anymore. Is the same thing happens, is that we create a metaphor in order to be able to handle and talk about those things that are bigger than us, and that we don't really have a proper language for. And then the mistake is, after a couple of generations of that, we start arguing for our metaphor rather than for the truth that is behind it.
I'm curious, as you've said a few things here, which has naturally brought up a question for me. You're talking about how back in the 70s, you had that guy say to you, this is really hypnosis, when you hadn't really recognized it as being that. And you were talking before about evolving hypnosis. How do you feel your own personal definition of hypnosis has changed over time? Has it, or has there been much of a difference over that period of time? Or do you recognize it still as being the same thing that you first came into contact with?
Well, I think if I get a little more experience, I will be able to define hypnosis the way that Erickson did. There was a class, my primary teacher is Stephen Gilligan, who was a protege of Erickson's. And Steve was talking about one day we were in Erickson's garage meeting room, and he was talking, and somebody asked him, Dr. Erickson, what is hypnosis? And Erickson just paused for a minute. The question really threw him. And he paused for a minute and he said, I don't know. And, they're all suddenly writing furiously. Erickson doesn't know what hypnosis is. There are so many ways that we talk about it. I think I think our definitions change depending on what the point is that we're trying to make.
They're very subjective. And you were talking before about people fighting over labels like unconscious and subconscious.
Mhm.
I think you want to start a real fight post what is hypnosis in the hypnosis group.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a good, the sort of standard definition that I latch onto, and other people have other ones that they like better, is that it's a state of concentrated, focused attention, and that's enough for me, because I'm more interested rather than defining it in sort of operating within that experience where people have access to the resources of their unconscious mind. My favorite metaphor is the reference library, and I don't know if you know this one, but I think it's
know.
So. Well, back in the day, so some people in your audience, you've got to be over 50 or something to know that there was a time before personal computers, and and if you wanted to do a research project, you would go to the library, and you would go up to the window of the reference librarian, and you would ring the bell. And, and she, because back in those days, it was always a she would come to the window, and you would say, I'm writing a report on the Hoover Dam, and I need all the information that you have on the Hoover Dam. And she'd say, well, okay, give me just a minute. I'll go get that for you. And she'll go back into the stacks and retrieve it, and then she'll come out. I think that the therapeutic model is this. It's asking yourself a number of interesting and useful questions to send the unconscious on a trans-derivational search, to gather the resources. The problem is that we keep interrupting it. My thing is I love movies. I'm a TV and movie guy. And I justify it by saying I want to keep my finger on the pulse of the nation just to see what people watch. Tells me what the world is all about. But I love movies and stuff, and every once in a while I'll see somebody on a television program that I recognize from somewhere else, but I can't for the life of me think
where it is. Yes.
Yeah. Who is this actor?
Grab your phone and start typing their name in and looking through their discography or their filmography.
Yeah. And so pounding my head with who could it possibly be? There's A.A. Milne writes in Winnie the Pooh. He says the more Pooh looked for Piglet, the more Piglet wasn't there. I know that's how it works for me when I'm trying to retrieve information like that, deliberately, consciously stressing myself about it. But I also notice that if I forget about it, if I finally go, F it, man, I'm not going to get this, and then a light bulb comes on, and there it is. It's like if you go to the reference librarian and you ring the bell, she goes back to get the information. But before she gets like 2 steps away from the window, you ring the bell again. And she comes back up. She says, what can I do for you? And you say, I want that stuff on the Hoover Dam. She says, I'm going to get it for you. And she takes, and you ring the bell again. So somehow or another, I have an appreciation of this natural process of seeking information that is engaged as soon as you ask a question, as soon as you ask a meaningful question. And so in a way, I think one of the things that we do with our clients is we invite them to develop a relationship with that trans-derivational searcher. Not to be pushing the river as it's a nice Gestalt metaphor there, but to really open up the question and let the answer come. I think it's the same way about induction. So something a little more practical for people to get is that we've all been taught all these techniques and told which ones were the right ones and which one were the wrong ones. And if you don't have somnambulism, or if you don't, or whatever the religion is, there's certain rules about how to do it right. That's all very interesting, but truthfully, what I know, for instance, is that Lawrence Akers knows how to go into hypnosis, as does every other human being on the planet, whether he called it that before. I mean, I had a good advantage of having people in profound altered states before I had the word hypnosis to apply to them. Mm-hmm. So I didn't get concerned about, about any of that stuff. So one of my favorite inductions, I do it with groups and stuff all the time, is just this very simple thing, and it comes from Stephen Gilligan, so you may run across it somewhere. He calls it scaling the somatic dimensions of trance. That's a really nice, Stanford academic kind of name. But basically, it's looking at those things that are typical of what we consider to be a hypnotic state. One of the most common, and by the way, there could be a great argument about this, and I welcome your students to go online and find somebody to fight with about whether or not relaxation is important in hypnosis.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if it's important or not. I think that relaxation is pleasant, and if I have a client who comes to see me and they're expecting that we're going to do something that involves that, and they have the belief that that's kind of what it takes, it's like, well, I know some people who just refuse to do it because science has now said it's no longer necessary.
I certainly know some people say you can generate hypnotic phenomena without the use of relaxation.
Yeah.
It can happen.
Yes.
Therefore, we don't necessarily need it, but
certainly you can. But you can pick any of the dimensions of trance. One of them that's often thought of is relaxation or comfort. Another one is absorption. People talk about this state called absorption. Various things. And to simply scale them on a scale of 1 to 10 and invite the person to discover how to adjust them. So as I'll say to my client, just right here, as you sit here now, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is so relaxed that, that you've never been so relaxed before in your life, and 1, on the other hand, is really tense and uptight and the absolute opposite end of the spectrum. And I'll just ask him, just right now as you're sitting there, where do you find yourself on that scale? And they'll say, well, I'm at about a 6, and it doesn't matter what number they say really, but I'm going to say, so right out of the box, you just start out at a 6, all by yourself. So that's great. If you'll close your eyes for a minute and just sort of check inside, notice what that feels like. And just acknowledge to yourself that this experience that you're having now is something that you've identified as a 6. And I ask them, would you be interested in finding out how to turn that 6 into a 7 or an 8? Nobody has said no yet. Not a single one, literally. I'm surprised because there's got to be some smart ass somewhere, but nobody has. So yeah, would you like to change that to a 7 or an 8? And they say, sure. And then basically the instruction is, then go ahead. I don't say it quite in those words, but I say, then just take a moment to begin to discover, as you consider, what changes might take place as that 6 becomes a 7 or an 8. You might find that it has something to do with the breathing. I mean, I'll give them some possibilities. I'm never going to tell them what to do. I'm never going to tell them what to do, but I'm going to say it might be this. You might find it has something to do with the breathing, or maybe for you, it seems like it's more to do with how it is that you hold your muscles, or maybe it's even the stillness that you can experience between one thought and another one. And just notice, and when you find a 7 or an 8, then just give me a nod as a way of letting me know. There isn't any place where I said to them, I'm going to put the mojo on you. I remember when I first started learning hypnosis, by the way, I was working in the church, and I was also working for the welfare department outside of Chicago. And my fellow workers said, oh, Watson is going to put the mojo on us because I've taken this hypnosis class. But it's so exactly the opposite of that, Larry. It's an invitation that says, make a discovery. And see, here's the other thing I like about it is, as a metaphor, we begin this conversation about hypnosis by letting people know that they have the capacity to change their experience. So it becomes a powerful hypnotic suggestion with regard to whatever the content is. But I sort of think almost everything that you do in hypnosis, you can simply invite your client to bring it out. If a client comes in presenting some terrible drama in their life, they are probably in a trance already.
Yes.
And so I could ask them, where do you feel that in your body? Put your attention there. Now, guess what? Now we've got concentrated, focused attention.
Yeah.
Put your attention there, and just attend to that, for a moment or so. And as you begin to discover what needs to happen next, let me know. And any way that I can do what I would call client-driven hypnosis. We've got this thing about being client-centered, right? You've heard that phrase before.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I'm afraid that some people don't really understand that phrase. I've heard people say, well, client-centered hypnosis means that if my client is like visual, because they kept talking in visual language, that I should use visual language to talk to them. Well, I think that's not, I think that's accommodating. I mean, that's very kind. Thank you. But that really isn't client-centered, because what it really is a trick that you're going to use to get rapport with them, so that you can like get around. All of the metaphors of hypnosis are about how do you get around your client's resistance. I don't have clients resisting because I'm not asking them to do things that they have any cause to resist. Other than, hey, let me know what's going on in there every now and again. See, I one of the most important hypnotic suggestions that I think a hypnotist should have at their disposal, write it on a big pad somewhere, in case you forget what to say in the middle of a session. Just be quiet for a moment and then say to your client, "What are you aware of now?" And then they'll give you something that is meaningful. And you can begin to move with whatever it is that they come up. They know why they're there. They know what the issue is, and they know all of the details about how that operates in their life that you wouldn't even begin to have a clue about. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I like to think of it as being something that really needs to be client driven.
I really like that distinction as well of calling it client-driven over client-centered. It really puts the emphasis back on the fact that the client is the one who is steering where this go, as opposed to what you said. Are we tapping into what their modalities are? So,
sure. Well, and I was talking at the beginning about my own struggle with the church and with being gay and the stuff that was going on around that. So I'm really sensitive to any system where you go to see some person in authority and they think they know what's going to be good for you, and so they're gonna program your brain, in order to do that. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a lovely place, right? If there were a museum, a hypnosis Hall of Fame, and there is, by the way, it's a filing cabinet actually, and they give an award every year at the IAC convention. Now it's been in property of different hypnosis organizations through the years. But if there were such a place, a brick and mortar, museum, there would be a statue out in front, and the statue would be a hysterical woman to whom we owe the entire history of psychology. It would be a hysterical woman, somehow laid back like Saint Teresa in ecstasy, and standing over her would be the hypnotist, like doing the big arms thing and odd eyes and stuff, trying to stuff some ideas into her consciousness. And I think that that's the way that a lot of people think about it, have thought about hypnosis for forever.
It's a form of mind control in a sense.
Yeah. Imposed upon clients by the hypnotist.
Yeah.
This is the 21st century. The other part of evolutionary hypnosis, I mentioned to you that it has to do with the fact that we are evolving or emerging or coming out into the world. Helen Keller is my patron saint for that. You know who she is?
Yes, she deaf and blind. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to ask when I talk to people from other countries, because I find out that she's an American folk hero. And when I first started going to the UK a bunch of years ago, they didn't have any idea.
Oh, no, we Australians definitely know who Helen Keller is. Yes.
Yeah. So desperately wanting to make contact with the world. And her diary, she really talks about her frustration with that and elegant description of her experience at that time in her life. And she'd had numerous teachers that tried to work with her to no avail. But I think what happened is Anne Sullivan, the miracle worker, the title of the play, Anne Sullivan said to her, "I know you're in there, little girl, and God damn it, I'm going to do what I have to do to bring you out." And I think that's the thing that we have to offer, is there is something that wants to happen with that person that's just showed up in my office, and I need to to stand with them in a position that allows them to emerge, to take their place in the world. To me, that's just beautiful. Well, it's a day of midwifery.
It is,
you
isn't it? It's pretty much saying, I'm going to stand by you, and whatever is birthed in this moment, we're going to be there together.
And I don't know if this idea really helps hypnotists that are that are struggling with getting their confidence until they understand that basically they don't really have to know the answer to every and anything. All they really need to do is to know how to support a person in this hypnotic experience, and really let the client start to do their own work.
I think that's quite a powerful thing to contemplate and to consider, isn't it? I know that for many people, they say, what do I do then with the voice in my head that tells me, we need to be able to help this person. We need to be able to, in that moment in the room with that person in front of you, what do they do to help step back from that and to allow themselves just to be more present so that they can be that person walking with that other person?
Yeah. Well, so almost everything our clients bring to us. So here's just one last little piece that I think is also a guiding principle to me. And you probably know something about the three principles.
I love the three principles. Yes.
Well, so do I. And quite honestly, the three principles revolutionized my life. I think it was really important. Everything your client brings to you is a nominalization at best. So they come in and they say, I have, trichotillomania. I think earlier, by the way, I just realized when I said that, it's one of those words that I don't use very often. I might have said trichotillomania, which is interesting. It'd be a fear of pulling out your hair.
It's funny, actually, that I rubbed my eyebrow just as you said that, but it's also a word that rolls off the tongue really beautifully, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. So, oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't done that. I think I've just lost my train of thought.
You've lost your train of thought. We were talking about when hypnotists are still in a room with people and they still experience their thoughts taking them away from being present in the moment.
Right. Well, and in fact, what I was actually saying was our clients' complaints typically are nominalizations. And what people don't understand is the experiences that we're having, whether it's satisfaction or happiness or depression or, give it a name. And when you give it a name, it sounds like it's a thing. This depression has got me. And if I don't treat it right, it's going to come back and get me again. It has volition and everything. It's very interesting, the kind of horror stories that we make up about our internal experiences. And then, of course, we're doomed to live with those horror stories. But what I understand is that my anxiety, for example, is something that I'm doing. And as soon as I know that I'm doing it, then it's something that I can stop doing. So I think there's a great lesson here. The way to be in control when you feel like you're out of control is to choose to be out of control and to do that on purpose for a moment, just for a moment. But as soon as you're doing it, then it isn't any longer something that's happening to you, and it's something that you can stop.
That's fantastic. I like that.
Yeah, I like that too.
I've
been to all the groups in my life. So that I think actually is an artifact from the EST training that I don't know if you know about that one. It eventually evolved in what became the Landmark Forum. But way back in the day, it was Erhard Seminars trainings, and it was this really Gestapo cattle transformation.
I actually did Landmark possibly well over a decade ago.
Yeah.
And I thought it was an interesting experience.
Yeah.
There were some interesting things to come out of it. Would I necessarily recommend it to someone else? My personal opinion is maybe not, but I felt like there were some interesting insights to come from it.
Well, and in its source, it was a whole lot different, and it went through a big transformation when it changed its name and let go of Werner Erhard, who put it together. But Erhard was more like a Zen master, likely to hit you over the head with a stick in the middle of the training, to get your attention. But basically, the bottom line of that whole program, and this whole late '60s, early '70s transformational mentality, coming out of the sort of post hippie days, we liked encounter groups. We like those sorts of things, and this was just another one of them. But the bottom line of the S training, as I experienced it in those days, was the sort of discovery that we've just spent days and days in this seminar whining and moaning and bitching about our lives and all of the things that people have done to us, etc. Rather than figuring out how it is that we could just start having a different experience. We are transfixed by the indignations of the way people have treated us in the past, and we continue to traumatize ourselves with our own history.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, S said, "Well, yeah, so that shit happened. Pardon my language, but that's right. So what are we going to do next?" And I think that's an important attitude. Is I had a guy the other day that was just he spent most of his session really working hard to convince me that he was miserable. I got that as soon as you came in here. But explaining to me why and what else had happened in the world, and I'm like, I can't do anything about the weather, or your genes, or just all the various things that he was laying out. But what I do know is it's a quotation from Abraham Lincoln. I know you know who he is.
Oh, yes.
Abraham Lincoln said, he says, "I reckon a person is just about as happy as he makes up his mind to be." By the way, I hate to ruin the quote by pointing out that Abraham Lincoln suffered depression, something terribly.
When you mentioned Abraham Lincoln, my initial thought was, I don't know if he's had a musical written about him yet, but then I thought, I don't know if Abraham Lincoln's too fond of theaters as it is. So
yeah, not anymore. Yeah. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play? Yeah. But I really think that's the issue, is that every one of us, and especially those of us that are hypnotists, we've got to know this, and we really need to know this, is that you have the ability, the opportunity to be delighted right now if you would like. And why not start exercising that stuff a little bit more? What is the quality of the life that you want to have? And rather than giving yourself a whole lot of reasons not to have it and thinking that it has, the priest in me says they're coming to me for an exorcism because they believe that this thing has possessed them, and they have no control over it, and it's doing a number on them. And I'm like, demons be gone. Then let's literally start having the kind of experience that we want to.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because over the years, the one thing I've learned about myself that helps me to get out of my own way is to bring in a state of curiosity and playfulness. When I find that I'm getting too serious in a session, regardless of if it is a serious issue that is happening, it may be, I don't want to diminish the other person's presenting issue. For myself, if I find that the self-talk is ramping up, then it's just a case of, well, let's just be curious here and play. And I think as soon as that playfulness comes, it allows me to just be in the moment and to explore what's there. So it's wonderful to be able to have that state shift from something that's happening internally, something I'm creating from my own experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as we all know, our reality is created from the inside out. So, Michael, if people wanted to get in touch with you to train with you or to explore how they might be able to work with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Probably by email. I am, and I like to tell it this way. I am in Florida, and I practice hypnosis, and I have a really fantastic outlook. So my email address is flhypno@outlook.com. Real easy. flhypno@outlook.com. And I'd love to hear from anybody that's got questions for me or wants to know what I'm doing. I do mentoring and a bunch of things like that. And sure.
Well, and I must say, thank you so much. I've truly enjoyed our chat today for me, this evening for you. And I'm pretty sure that people who've been listening in or watching on this have truly enjoyed it as well. So thank you so much for your time.
You're really welcome, Lawrence. Thank you.
For everyone else, I hope you've enjoyed the episode today. Make sure you tune in next fortnight. Until then, please stay safe. Take care. Thank you for watching the Confident Hypnotherapist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, make sure you go and check out some of the other episodes that we have available online. And if you really enjoyed it, make sure you give us a like or subscribe to the channel, as it helps to make sure that you're notified as each episode goes up. Of course, make sure you jump onto Facebook and find the Hypnotherapist networking group. Lots of valuable information there for both new hypnotists and experienced hypnotists alike. I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.